Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant, bringing you part 8 of my series, discussing the Star Trek vs. Star Wars debate. In this part, I will finally tally up and tell you all who I think would win in a fight. I'll reiterate that this is Star Trek Federation, as of the Dominion War, versus the Galactic Empire, as of Return of the Jedi. As I mentioned in part 1 so long ago, the question of who wins is dependent on how they're fighting. So I'm going to talk about a 1v1 ship battle, in this case a Galaxy-class Federation ship versus an Imperial 1 Star Destroyer, a fleet versus fleet battle with equal numbers of capital ships on each side, a 1v1 ground matchup of each faction's finest, an army versus an army battle, and finally, which faction would actually conquer a sample galaxy the fastest. I'll also touch upon how I think the Federation would deal with the Death Star. Starting with the 1v1 ship matchup, this clearly ends up going to the Federation Galaxy-class starship. As explained in the weaponry section, the Federation phasers and Empire turbolasers are at least in the same ballpark in terms of destructive power, and the assumption that any torpedoes are even more destructive I think is pretty safe. This means that each ship is at least capable of harming the other, though Star Destroyer is probably more heavily armed overall. This part of the contest comes down to effective ranges and speed at sublight speeds. This is where the comparison isn't even close. Federation phaser banks have the ability to accurately hit targets at up to 250 times the range that an Imperial turbolaser could even try to hit anything. This means that unless the Federation captain is an idiot, they'll try to keep the Star Destroyer at a distance and destroy them from afar, which of course they can easily do, since full impulse is about twice as fast as an A-wing fighter, the fastest ships at sublight in the Star Wars universe. And that makes them about 4 times as fast as Star Destroyers. Max from the future here to correct a math error. In my speed section, I talked about how full impulse is 1/4 the speed of light, or 167,000 miles per hour. Yeah, that's off by 3 orders of magnitude. It's actually 167 million miles per hour, which means that full impulse is 2,000 times faster than an A-wing and 4,000 times faster than a Star Destroyer. It's still a lot faster, but the difference is a lot more dramatic than I made it out to be before. Sorry. This means that after even deploying all of its fighters and bombers, everything that the Empire could use would be at the mercy of the Federation ship. Even if the fighters managed to get close, most are unshielded, which means that the Federation transporters could simply beam the pilots away mid-flight. Well, okay, so I hear the rebuttal. What if something like what happened at the end of Rogue One, with the Star Destroyer jumping right next to the Galaxy class and just starts blazing away? What if that happened? Well, first off, this is a very interesting question, but it's also super specific scenario. First of all, the only reason that this scene could even play out in the first place is because of the way that hyperspace lanes work. There's really only a couple ways in and out of any given system for light speed drives, so the Rebels being clustered next to one of them makes perfect sense, which also ties into how Vader and his Star Destroyer was able to come up right on top of them. The fact that these jump in and out points are so limited is why things like the blockade in Episode 1 actually works. There's one place you have to guard. That's it. Warp drive doesn't work this way, though. It's way slower than hyperdrives, but you can approach anything from any angle. It's still technically possible for a jump scare attack like the one in Rogue One to occur, but highly unlikely. Plus, if it ever did happen, the Federation ship would still be able to just go away. They could either jump to warp for a bit and go in any direction they like, or they could just go to full impulse and get away that way, and the Imperial Star Destroyer would never catch up. There's also the tactical side of things to remember. Federation tactics are just better than Imperial ones. Possibly with a couple exceptions like Thrawn, but by and large, Imperial captains are awful and only have their jobs because they know someone powerful. So let's pivot into a fleet engagement. I can't think of any combination of ships that the Empire could assemble that could possibly contend with the Federation fleet for the same reasons that a 1v1 fight would go against the Empire. Their fighters would be hilariously useless, and none of their ships could even get up close enough to actually use their weapons. Even interdictors wouldn't help since, unlike lightspeed, warp really isn't that affected by gravity wells short of black holes, and if the Empire generated a gravity well that intense, they'd destroy their own fleet. Super Star Destroyers run into the exact same issues. They can bring a ton more firepower to bear over any other Star Destroyers, but they have the exact same range and speed limitations as their smaller brethren. Tactically speaking, the only really intelligent course of action that the Empire could take during a fleet engagement would be to retreat. At faster than light speeds, the Empire gains a huge mobility advantage, and the Federation simply would not be able to keep up. So, while the Federation totally outclasses the Empire in terms of combat abilities, The massive difference in faster-than-light speeds means that a total victory in a fleet engagement would be basically impossible for the Federation, assuming, of course, that the bullheaded Imperial commanders were willing to retreat. One issue that was brought up in the comments section was that the Empire could utilize tractor beams to pull the Federations in close and blow them up that way. As demonstrated in A New Hope, Imperial tractor beams, at least those on the Death Star, can be insanely long range, especially compared to Federation tractor beams, which require much closer proximity. There's a couple issues with this, though. One, only the Death Star has demonstrated the super long-range tractor beam ability, and it was against the Millennium Falcon, a tiny ship, and since there's been multiple instances where the Empire has been chasing other ships using their Star Destroyers and they haven't used tractor beams in this way, there's clearly some limitation that would inhibit their use in a fight. Second is the fact that the Federation is highly practiced in countering tractor beams, even ones being used by a technologically superior faction like the Borg. In short, I don't think that the tractor beam would actually help much, if at all, in this fight. Moving on to the ground engagement, the tides turn pretty dramatically. In a 1v1 conflict of the best versus the best, I can't think of anyone in the Federation who could last more than a couple seconds against Darth Vader. Force users are just insanely powerful. Even Commander Data, with his android brain, strength, and reflexes, is absolutely no match for the Force and a lightsaber. If you match up a 1v1 of a regular soldier versus a regular soldier on each side, it would probably be pretty even, but somewhat favor the Federation crew members since phasers are really powerful and accurate, and Stormtrooper armor can't actually stop anything, and they're notoriously bad shots. Of course, even if they were much better marksmen, phasers are just a far superior weapon. Still though, the difference here wouldn't be terribly significant, so it could really go either way, but I still think the Federation officer would have a bit of an edge. Army versus Army, the Federation doesn't stand a chance. They don't use any kind of tanks, and they don't have a ground army per se, beyond some armed crew members for away teams. And they don't use body armor, so even nearby explosions or glancing hits can easily be lethal compared with the limited protection Stormtrooper armor provides. The Empire can simply field way more and way more powerful ground-based weaponry. And phasers, while incredibly powerful, even handheld phasers can vaporize entire people. They, when used against things like shuttlecraft, only leave scorch marks, so they would be really hard-pressed to actually take down an Imperial walker of any kind. Finally, the scenario question. In the first part of this series, I set the parameter that this is a fresh galaxy where nobody has any foothold already, but where all the technology already works. This means that the Empire can actually utilize their hyperspace corridors with no issue, despite the lack of any exploration, to figure out where it's safe to go. So the question is, in the scenario where they're both introduced to a brand new galaxy where everything works, who conquers it first? In short, it's the Empire. They conquer it first. They can travel the length of the galaxy in a matter of days instead of decades, and they can spread uncontested for a very long time before even encountering the Federation. And once they do encounter the Federation, they can simply avoid combat and hop the Death Star from Federation planet to Federation planet, systematically blowing them up as they're colonized and then jumping away to safety when a counterattack is mounted. That said, I don't think that the Empire would be able to keep this up for too long, since the Federation would quickly figure out the dangers and limitations of the Death Star and learn to counter them, potentially forcing fights the Empire simply cannot win. But even then, with how much faster the Empire could take system after system across the galaxy, I think they'd eventually just reach the point of being able to just ignore the Federation fleet entirely and just conquer or destroy planets and space stations, effectively limiting the Federation to only a fleet with no infrastructure, unless they somehow manage to keep it secret for a really long term. As for the Death Star, I think that the Federation really wouldn't have too much trouble in taking it down. First of all, versus the Death Star 1, any Federation vessel would be capable of inflicting extreme damage and possibly destroying it by themselves, because it simply wasn't capable of actually hitting ships with its super laser, and its turbo laser batteries run into the same issues as the Star Destroyers. Their range just isn't very good. As before, fighters would still be basically entirely useless, again because of the speed disparity. Plus the fact that they're unshielded, so if they get close, they just get transported away and are done. Versus the Death Star 2 is where things get interesting. I think that if a single Federation ship fought the Death Star 2, it would come down to angle. If they approach from the super laser side, they'd basically just instantly lose. They would get one shot. If they could stay out of the firing arc of the super laser, they'd be able to inflict crazy damage to the station over time. Both Death Stars can only rotate in place so fast, after all, so they'd be able to just stay in the blind spot. A Federation fleet versus the Death Star 1 or 2 would pretty much always be a victory for the Federation. Even a combined fleet of the Death Star with a ton of Star Destroyers, like we saw in Return of the Jedi, would just get shredded by a Federation fleet. The effective range and sublight speed advantage is just too huge. Think of it this way. Imagine 100 guys with longbows as a stand-in for a Star Destroyer. They can do crazy amount of damage to anything within 100 yards or so, but getting from place to place is a slow march. Now, pit them against one guy with a sniper rifle and a Jeep, our Federation ship. He can pick them off from a mile away, well outside any range they could hope to even shoot, much less hit, and if they start getting close to the sniper, he can just get in his Jeep and move farther away. The only way that range and mobility advantages like this get countered by immobile but powerful weaponry is through stupidity. And as we've established before, Starfleet captains don't get where they are by being stupid, or because Daddy knows someone. So there you go, my take on the Star Trek versus Star Wars debate. I'm a huge fan of both universes, so I hope I've treated each side as fairly as possible, but what do you think? Did I accidentally favor one side over the other unfairly? Did I forget about something huge that changes everything? Should I match some other factions against each other? Should we discuss the Empire versus Q? That'd be short. Or perhaps the Empire versus the Borg? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.